for the launch of the new book by Sugatha Srinivasaraju, Strange Burdens, the Politics and the Predicaments of Rahul Gandhi. The book has been well praised by authors, columnists, journalists, professors, and filmmakers, and also readers alike. I'm just going to take a few minutes and read out the advanced praise the book has been receiving. Here are a few lines which are taken out of the blurbs. Sanjay Ruparelia, who is the author of the book, Divided We Govern, Coalition Politics in Modern India, and is also the Jaroslawski Democracy Chair of Toronto Metropolitan University, has said, and I quote, eschewing the scorn of critics as well as the adulation of supporters, Strange Burdens invites readers to take seriously the singular political life of Rahul Gandhi. Sugatha Srinivasaraju examines his ideas, speeches, and actions during key historical moments sympathetically yet critically. In doing so, he raises questions and pursues enigmas that demand further rumination. A rich essay distinguished by its psychological insight and literary flair. I won't tell you more on that because I've read the book myself and I have felt all these words. The second quote is from the sociologist, political activist, former professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Anand Kumar. He writes, I quote, this book is an enchanting invitation to understand the personality and politics of Rahul Gandhi. It helps to navigate someone who represents the paradoxical togetherness of hope and hopelessness, the dynasty and the democratic, eminence and emptiness, clarity and confusion, problems and prospects. Sugatha Srinivasaraju, an unconventional media person, has an enviable command over the facts of modern India and party politics, which has made the narrative about Rahul Gandhi also an engaging excursion into the making of the Indian nation and its post-colonial trajectories, including Jawaharlal Nehru and Narendra Modi. The lucidity of text and interconnection of contexts make it a classic in the crowd of books on Indian leaders today. Jeremy Seabrook, author and columnist, has all the praises for Strange Burdens. And the quote is, the analysis here is far-reaching and profound, since Rahul Gandhi is an emblem of social and economic change, a symbolic figure in a landscape disfigured and made unrecognizable by ideological earthquakes. I really felt that what Sugatha has written here reaches far into areas rarely understood as political, although indeed they are. The book is dense and deep and ought to be obligatory reading for every member of the Congress party. Although it is more likely that the Bharatiya Janata Party will heed its multiple message more attentively. I was thoroughly captivated by this book. Senior journalist and columnist Neerja Chowdhury says, written with empathy, the book tries to demystify the persona and politics of Rahul Gandhi as an alternative to the Modi phenomenon. Like I said, filmmakers and writers and journalists and professors and readers alike have already praised the book. So one of the filmmakers and eminent writer, Parthu Chatterjee, has said, this unusual book is an astute political commentary on the present times. Sugatha places the truly courageous but beleaguered Congress leader Rahul Gandhi in a wider context and very perceptively analyzes both the state of the man and his party, which is still emblematic of cherished democratic principles that grew out of the struggle for freedom from British rule. I would leave the rest for you to read it yourself when you pick up a copy of the book. Before moving on to the welcoming of the esteemed panelists on stage, there's something that I would want to mention to the audience here. The author, Mr. Sugatha Srinivasaraju, will be interacting with the audience, so we will be taking the questions in the end. Any questions, any clarifications about the book, the author will be talking to you in the end and interacting with you. Now, on behalf of Penguin Random House, Paradashak Media Foundation, an independent and public-spirited organization, and the Bookworm Bookstore, one of the finest bookstores in Bangalore, I welcome our distinguished panelists on stage for Bangalore launch of Stage Burdens, the Politics and Predicaments of Rahul Gandhi. I welcome our chief guests on stage. Professor J.M. Devi is one of India's foremost public intellectuals. He is well known for the People's Linguistic Survey of India. He is also a great institution builder. The Bhasha Center and the Adivasi Academy in Pejgarh of Gujarat are doing wonderful work. Among many awards, he is the recipient of the Sahitya Academy Award for his book After Amnesia, the Lingupox Prize, the SARC Literary Award, the Prince Claus Prize, and the Padma Shri. He now lives in Dharwad. His recent edited volume, The Indians, Histories of a Civilization, is being widely discussed and greatly appreciated. And I'll invite him to say a few words.
Eminent panelists, Dr. Sanjeev Jain, Chiranjeev Singh ji, and Padmavati. Ladies and gentlemen, I have immense pleasure in being asked to do the release of this great book for Bangalore. Thank you. Thank you for asking me. Thank you, ma'am. It's a privilege. Since we have three very eminent panelists who will be talking about the book, I'll keep my comments very brief. A. Sugatha Srinivasaraju has created a very high standard in the genre called life writing, and particularly the difficult area of doing a political life writing. I cannot think of another Indian who has attained this kind of excellence in the genre. You all know that he earlier written book on another leader from Karnataka. But this protagonist he chosen is a particularly difficult protagonist. A particularly difficult protagonist is chosen in particularly difficult times. Because our times are known for being misunderstood faster than being understood. He has based this book on a very detailed and in-depth study of all the statements that are available in the public domain, statements by Rahul Gandhi, his lectures, his discussions in public space, and also two very extraordinary interviews that Sugatha had, two meetings that Sugatha had with him, and other books and material available. So it's based on a very good, very thorough, very thoughtful study. And that was the list that I would have expected from the author of this book. I know his earlier work, and I'm kind of spoiled getting used to a very thoroughly researched book coming from him. That's the minimum that his books have. What is remarkable is he could have tackled this subject in various ways. He could have made it theatrical. He could have made it a book of his own ideology imposed on a writer, on a protagonist, and he could have looked at him through his own prism. What is rather done is try to the Sanskrit word, if you pardon me, is to do parakaya pravesh. Is entered the mind of Rahul Gandhi and tried to bring out things from there which are not known in the public domain, and that's remarkable. And these are not inventions of his, figments of Sugatha's imagination. He's corroborated all those observations by giving support for what is said. Two things. One, Rahul Gandhi as an individual in his life, which shaped in the crucible of murder of a grandmother, assassination of a grandmother, assassination of his father, and the deep wounds from which Rahul suffered in his early life, and how some of that pain returns to his thought and action. That's an observation which deserves attention by the nation. The second, more elusive, less noticed aspect of Rahul Gandhi's personality is his quest, his spiritual quest, his closeness to Buddha, ideas of Buddha, and how so very often he returns to those ideas. And the third, which Dr. Sanjeev Jain perhaps is more capable of talking about, is the breaks in communication that one experiences when Rahul Gandhi either is speaking to public or in private conversation. Sometimes Sugatha has very kindly said he was speaking like an academic. But these are disturbing. And these are disturbing because one feels that, well, in the conversation Rahul Gandhi is absent. Somehow he is not on the same page. After a paragraph, after initial conversation, he is elsewhere. Sugatha has actually pointed out that he is consistent through his life. In these breaks, there is a Rahul Gandhi which is tuned with a completely different order of politics. So this book is not just about a protagonist, it's about an idea of a different kind of politics. I would like to add, with your permission, Sugatha, that in my experience of meeting the person, meeting Rahul Gandhi or talking to him or corresponding with him, I have often felt the urgency with which he goes at four things. A, he wants the intellectuals and the media persons to create a new narrative for India. And it is not a narrative for new India, but a narrative which is couched in, which is rooted in cultural traditions, but is very different from the narrative filled with scorn and contempt that the BJP and the RSS have got for it. He really expects from intellectual classes and media persons to create such a narrative. And I think in your second interview or first interview, that discussion happens, is reported, and I also noticed that happening in the latest received from Rahul Gandhi or in his other discussions. The second thing is he is extremely keen on reducing the gap between the super rich and the poor people. That is his economics, but he is not returning to socialist mode of economy. And that's a strange bind out of which he has to find a way before. So very often people ask why he is not presenting his own program to the nation. Perhaps he's working in progress. The third is he has a great dislike for political parties, the kind of political parties that exist in India. And is looking at a new kind of a political formation, political party. And he's struggling to make the Congress that kind of party, and often he expresses his exasperation with the uh, with the Congress. The fourth and the most important, and perhaps some of you remember that Rahul actually mentioned it in a lecture, though it's not elaborated on. He's concerned with the caste system. He said that so long as Indians believe in rebirth, and so long as we have the idea that we have some fixed deposit in another world which we carry forward, or a liability which we carry forward in another life, we cannot defeat the caste system. And Rahul is genuinely interested in defeating the caste system, which is part, it's not the concern for any political party as of now, except the Communist parties. Very often he has been debunked as an anarchist, which is not the case. He has faith in the state. He respects law in his personal life. I am saying all these things because Sugatha had to depict Rahul as an ideologist, Rahul as a thinker, Rahul as a spiritual seeker, Rahul as a politician tied to a party, Rahul as a person carrying the great burden of legacy which he has inherited, and that's a strange mix of legacy. It's a great legacy with great liabilities as well. This was a difficult depiction, and I would like to say with utmost humility that Sugatha has written this book much better than if I were to write it. Excellent book. Do read it. Just as Rahul's ideology of economic equalization is work in progress. His political career is work in progress. And Sugatha Srinivasaraju has taken a certain risk. If Rahul succeeds in future in the eyes of the public citizens, then to that extent Sugatha will get great credit. For some reason, if Rahul Gandhi fails in future in the eyes of the public, Sugatha Srinivasaraju will have to carry the strange burden of having depicted a protagonist. And it's a great risk for a writer. That requires courage. And commitment to ideas. And I think this book will go a long way in explaining to everybody that Rahul Gandhi is a zinda dil insan. He's a living human. He's not a brand-made icon. He is not a stereotype leader, but a human with greatness and frailties clubbed together. And his frailties give value to his greatness. His greatness rescues him from his frailties. These two together come through this book in the most realistic, most empathetic manner, and yet this is not eulogizing. This book does not create a myth of Rahul Gandhi. It is an extremely hard-hitting, realistic, critical book written with great empathy. It's a great example of good political, historical criticism. For writing this, I want to congratulate you, Sugatha, once again, and I want to congratulate Bangalore for having such an author in this city. You made him possible, he made this book possible. Let's welcome him. Thank you so much.
Dr. Sanjeev Jain to say a few words. Dr. Sanjeev Jain is one of India's top psychiatrists. He is on the faculty of Humans. He researches in the area of genetic and molecular basis of psychiatric disease and leads a molecular genetics laboratory. He has also been a historian of psychiatric services in Indian subcontinent. His edited volume, with Dr. Alok Sareen, The Psychological Impact of the Partition of India, is acknowledged as a very special work that looks at post-independent Indian history from a very unique and sensitive perspective. We now invite him to speak.
I think Professor Devi has summarized all the issues, all the broad brush on which this book is based. It is a very human book. It touches upon, as he pointed out so poignantly, the greatness and the frailties of the man. And it's these frailties and these errors, both of omission and commission, which make you believe that here is a man who's genuinely trying to improve himself and in the process change the nature of political debate in the country. But let me go back to the specific thing that Sugatha and I had spoken about some years ago, about the notion of forgiveness and what it does to the idea of political maturity. Now this was arising from our work on the partition of India, which, as you all know, it had more than 1 million deaths and several lakhs displaced. Victim stories abound, and there are volumes and anthologies of victims' accounts, but there is not a single named perpetrator. There is no person who committed those crimes. We have only victims but no perpetrators, and that creates a particularly ambivalent situation in our thinking about what is trauma, who is to blame, who is to be forgiven, who is to be punished, because if nothing is done, the same crimes happen over and over again. So in the beginning of the book, as the whole chapter on grief and reconciliation starts with a very poignant issue of the children of the Gandhi family trying to interact with the assassins of Rajiv Gandhi and understanding and, in a sense, inverted commas, forgiving them. What's even more interesting is the attitude of those people, of the alleged perpetrators or the presumed perpetrators, and their resonance with the trauma that they have caused these two young children, Priyanka and Rahul Gandhi. So this is something that was picked up many years ago during the partition itself, when one commentator very astutely pointed out that the victims we can heal, he's a doctor, with the stitching of their wounds, but the abyss in the heart of the perpetrator, who has taken it upon himself to stab a person to death, that wound will take decades to heal and will poison the atmosphere of India for generations to come. It is that unfinished story of partition that we are living with now. When you see these kinds of sectarian violence, the lack of forgiveness, the permanent victimhood, the permanent quest for revenge for events that happened a millennium ago. So this kind of revenge politics has been perpetuated in a way which the very first two chapters try to dissuade us from. That there is a way out. There is a way out of both reconciliation and forgiveness and empathy, which will go on to build a stronger nation and a stronger community, rather than harping on vindictiveness and revenge as the only metaphor to drive politics. So this, in the current social context, becomes a very powerful statement, and therefore Sugatha needs to be complimented for bringing this issue of victimhood and forgiveness. It could be religious persecution, it could be caste persecution, it could be anything at all. But the violence that is endemic in our society of settling scores is really something that we should try to get over. After all of us were taught at school that the sins of fathers need not be visited on their sons. But we do not seem to understand even this simple truism. So this remorse and the ability to go beyond retributive politics is something that is really emotional. Now, the book obviously as a political document also discusses the nation of power and how parties try to assess to get power and power for its own sake and all the machinations that go on and the immense calculations, etc., etc. But as a doctor, we were always taught that growth for the sake of growth or power for the sake of power is actually the philosophy of a cancer cell. Power for the sake of power and growth for the sake of growth is just like how cancer grows. And nobody really wants cancer around. So to this single-minded race for power has its own problems. So Rahul Gandhi is passed off as a dilettante by various people, whereas others are so-called shrewd and Machiavellian or Chanakya, etc., etc.
there is also this preoccupation which Rahul Gandhi himself and Professor Devi has already talked about this whole notion of caste and identity and gotras and all. And somebody actually insists on DNA proof. Now, as a researcher in genetics for quite some time, we know very well that there is no such thing possible. The DNA of any one human being cannot really differentiate. And to have political processes that think that these identities are hardwired in stone, that these are not social constructs but actually biological perspective, and you can question or demean a person by blaming his parents for being of different religions is really, whatever. I don't even know a term to do that. Because what he points out is the very ordinary and natural secularism that goes on. And secularism is a very important idea in psychiatry, because psychiatry is only 200 years old. And it grew out of the whole idea that the human mind can be understood on secular principles and need not be dependent upon feudalism, casteism, religious orthodoxy, or any kind of slave mentality. That every man and every man's mind was free and equally free. And that is the very basis on which psychiatry is based. So to accept this kind of simple secularism by which everybody is assured of freedom of space, of freedom of their thought, is a very, very important fact, rather than subscribe to a definition of identity. So these kinds of one-dimensional identities that are being forced upon us actually goes back to people like Herbert Marcuse. So, the one-dimensional man hypothesis that modern man is being reduced to an extremely narrow, amorphous, and probably a mythical existence. And that is something that, as Professor Devi has already pointed out, the man is spiritually seeker. He's trying to get answers. He does not have any certainties. And we know that, the Dhrad Sankalp and Kathor Niti have its own problems. So it's much, much better to have somebody who's confused and seeking an answer rather than somebody who has all the answers, which are quite obviously false most of the time. So there are, of course, very amusing anecdotes about various interactions with other people and the politicians with their posh accents and the Khan market crowds and all that. So there is a degree of witticism, of gentle sardonic humor, of very deep-cutting, incisive insights into the way politics works, and the whole Chanakya Niti of bringing up issues of food or love jihad, which are basically the age-old Chanakya Niti of Dand, Bhed, Chal, Kapat. Do we really want to go back to politics of Dand, Bhed, Chal, Kapat? So we have to have a new idea of dealing with human minds with the notion that everybody is actually equal and free. Now, there is also a very interesting anecdote about how the charkha has been reduced to an artifact. And this I was particularly struck by, because a couple of years ago I was at a museum in England where there was a charkha on display. The charkha had nothing to do with India, apparently, but it did. Because the charkha was something that a British thinker called John Ruskin had introduced both Mahatma Gandhi and Queen Victoria to. So Queen Victoria was an advocate of the charkha at the same time as Mahatma Gandhi was an advocate of the charkha. So much so that one of the queens, I think, knitted a shawl for Mrs. Gandhi or something at the time of independence. So the charkha had its own different history as an element of protest against the one-dimensional man that was being created by the force of industrialization and capitalism in the ideas of John Ruskin. And John Ruskin's book is the first book Gandhi ever translated. So these ideas of the charkha and has a particular universal resonance, which is quite interesting. There are obviously more technical issues which needs to worry about. The issues about the Twitter numbers, about how the so-called flat media or the social media space is actually not so flat. It is prone to manipulations, it is prone to errors, it is prone to very manipulative processes, as the recent elections in Kenya and the violence in Africa pointed out, that there is a withdrawal of all the checks and balances. Now, of course, there is an issue with the so-called Khan market elite, but this is an idea in Delhi for very long. So even at the height of the Mughal Empire, not at the height, at the decline of the Mughal Empire, when the British had taken over Delhi, there was a small song, I forget the exact words, but the operative line was, Shahanshah Alam, Dilli se Palam. So the fact that Delhi didn't exist very much beyond the confines of Lutyens' Delhi of that kind, of that time, is a very old concept. And so the idea that the protagonists in the book, not just Rahul Gandhi, but also the many other people who are described and whose interactions are described, from Shruti Kapila, who introduced him at Cambridge, who's a colleague, because he also worked on the history of psychiatry in some detail. So the fact that a man has these frozen moments and takes time to collect his thoughts, and often exposes his thoughts in a kind of a mixture between Western and Indian metaphors. You know, the thing that he talks about, Kashmir Ganga mein dal di. You know, it's a confluence of ideas and the confluence of rivers being mixed up in his head. So he's using a metaphor from English into the nearest Hindi approximation, which sometimes falls flat, but otherwise, if you try to take the pain to understand the original abstract meaning, it's actually quite perspective. You know, it has a very interesting thing. There is also a thing about Rahul being a straight shooter, which is a very good thing to be, one would think. But again, I'm reminded of a poor English doctor who came in the 18th century, and he was very upset because he said in India, being straight is an insult, because he understood that being Siddha is not the mean, and Siddha Sada is not exactly a compliment in many Indian languages. So being straight and being Siddha Sada actually is good in a much wider context, and it's not a sign of naivety or anything. Of course, there are statements by other leaders which make statements like, we were ashamed of being born in India and a sin to be born in India. I personally have never felt that, so I can't comment on such statements because I have always been fairly proud to be an Indian, but we can leave that to those people. The complex games of identity politics are, of course, highlighted over and over again. That the reality of politics in India, as Professor Devi pointed out, is very different from the kind of ideas that Rahul is trying to propound. Now, whether we will actually move or will we assume that the masses, as the book keeps on pointing out, can be swayed by stories and images rather than by reason, that we are destined to live in a Hobbesian, nasty, brutish, sectarian divisions, or do we have an alternative of the kind that is being proposed by this seemingly muddled young man? But being muddled, as I mentioned, is actually a good thing, because there are no finite answers in this world, and therefore it is very relevant. At the end, the 4 issues about the lack of scrutiny. Now, this is again has been pointed out, it's a work in progress. Chow En-lai was famously asked what he thought of the French Revolution, and he said, it is too soon to tell. So that's how, when Gandhi was asked about the Western civilization, and on the wall of WHO, that poster is put up, I think it would be a good idea. So the fact that both the Western civilization and the French Revolution are still works in progress, we are very much latecomers on the screen. So it is a work in progress, and we are genuinely the only pluralistic society which has persisted in its plurality for 3 millennia at least. So there is something to be said about the persistence of pluralism in India. So it is definitely, in that sense, not a work in progress. Lastly, the whole idea of this foreign issues, Rahul saying something in the foreign lands and getting foot in the mouth kind of experiences very often, at least as far as the media is concerned. Now this raises a very different issue. Now Clement Attlee, when he was so-called granting India independence, pointed out and hoped that India was the only bastion of European liberal thinking in the whole of Asia. His concern was that if India did not keep up with the European ideals of Renaissance and reform and progress and sank back into Asiatic despotism, the world would be poorer. So that does remain a very big concern, because here we have a seemingly cosmopolitan man who's giving another future, who's imagining another future for India, and is willing, in a sense, given the family history, to lay his life on the line for it. And that is a real concern, because this kind of, I say, foolhardiness of extensive human-to-human contact, of actually going down and trying to understand what the marginalized feel, what the oppressed feel, and can we do something about it, has the possibility of reinvigorating our political process and our society. So this is very much, as has already been said, a work in progress. It reminded me of a wonderful old book by Günter Grass called The Diary of a Snail, about the political processes that went on in Germany in the 1970s or 80s, in the right wing and the secularists or the more liberal parts were in constant play. And like that author kept pointing out the horrors of Nazism, Sugatha also points out the various horrors that have visited us and how this is also, if Germany is a work in progress, so is India. And Europe is also a work in progress, just like India. Thank you very much for this lovely book, and thank you.
Poet, translator, and a farmer. Padmavati Rao was also a heroine alongside the most charismatic Shankana. Come on, who can forget? Joteli, Jota Joteli.
In more ways than one, over here on the dais. I'd like to say a very good evening to all the eminent panelists here. It is indeed a privilege to be able to share the dais with each one of you. Thank you, Sugatha, for thinking me to be worthy of this. So I have to make a confession, shall we say, not just an admission. I am very far removed from politics. I can barely understand family politics. Okay, so I decided to approach this book from when Sugatha asked me to be on the panel. And I told him this. And I said, I will approach it from where I am. Yeah, I am a Hindu. I am a woman in this country. I'm a woman who has enjoyed great privilege being of the religion I am, and I hold it with pride, but not with fanaticism or with fundamentalism. My mother used to vote, I think, for the Congress, but I'm not sure, because it was like democracy really thrived in our home. Nobody told anybody who they were voting for. And so we never knew. And so it was with great faith in Sugatha's writing, in the way he would approach Rahul Gandhi, this very controversial figure who seems to be saddled with strange burdens, truly strange burdens. One of the things that struck me in Sugatha's book was that line about being the uniter and the unifier. That possibly, this is also a similarity with the BJP and the Prime Minister of India. There are similarities despite the differences. There are these great similarities, and yet each one has carved their own path in order to achieve what they will for the nation, supposedly. But what happens to the common person in the process? The one who is reasonably educated, not necessarily erudite. I am a process worker, and so I resonate with what Dr. Sanjeev Jain spoke about. That yes, our country is 200 years old, but human processes are much older. They are from the beginning of time, from the time the first human walked the earth. And I think it is with that in mind that I resonated with the book. Because what Sugatha seems to do with the book is, like Sanjeev Jain pointed out, that he says he's a straight shooter. And it does get him into trouble. And just when you say, okay, here's some hope, and then there's a blooper. And I don't think Sugatha has been kind all the time. I think he's able to see the simultaneity of these things that Rahul Gandhi seems to carry within. And so I want to, in fact, very early in the book, I'd like to read a passage from the book, with your permission, Sugatha. Yeah? Um, to give you a glimpse, of how in the book both sides of the coin become available to you. So he's not, though it is about Rahul Gandhi, he's not talking exclusively about Rahul Gandhi alone. He also talks about the other side. He also talks about the possibilities. He also talks about what was not done, or what was not achieved, or what could have been done. So he says here very early on in the book, how much ever Rahul Gandhi is acquainted with public attention and adulation, this is a heady moment of success for him. As the media mindlessly showers praise, as his rivals silence their guns, and his own insecure party men grant him more victories than he should take credit for, the real problem begins for Rahul. The problem of tending to believe a little too much in his own destiny and nourishing the surge of greatness inside him. Surely he is well groomed to stem this tide eventually. But then there is an antidote exercise that he can follow to handle it quickly and with some marked efficiency. All that he has to do is stand before the mirror in classical style and begin to doubt as well as deny himself all his election victories. Even at the risk of sounding like Priyanka Gandhi's Vipassana instructor, let us proceed to detail some plain speaking that Rahul Gandhi should do with himself. The first thing he has to tell the mirror is that there is nothing called the Rahul doctrine, or that he has not evolved one as yet. He is being praised for the Uttar Pradesh UP victory. And this he quotes from a source. But he should emphasize that the 12 extra seats came not because of some great strategy, but by default. The decision to go it alone in the large state was also not a carefully thought out game plan, but was more a slide of circumstances and a lingering, vague idea that lacked confidence. He should ponder if people in the state were upset with the Samajwadi Party and Bahujan Samaj Party, using them as herds in their social engineering experiment and wanted to recover their self-respect. If some yuppie sociologist has told Rahul that this is the end of the Mandal era, he should perhaps wait till the next round of elections to verify the truth. Usually, people don't cast away their cultural caste religious identities overnight to embrace economic identities. They are simply fatigued by the fact that their leaders foreground and exploit these identities. Caste pride or caste-based subjugation and economic growth are mutually exclusive. To assume that one will diminish the other is too simplistic. I really want to go on, but okay, I'll read one more line. Rahul should ask if the Dalits in UP have begun to wonder about the whimsical ways of Mayawati and hence have opted for a change. Have a section of the Muslims come to the Congress as a result of SP's secular certificate to Kalyan Singh, the former BJP chief minister who presided over the demolition of the Babri Masjid? Again, he quotes. So everywhere, Sugatha has used evidence or he's used people whom he quotes, and then he gives you his take on it. And believe me, whether it's a layperson, whether it's a politician, whether it's an academician, anyone who votes, anyone who considers himself or herself a citizen of this country, I think would benefit from reading this book. Simply because, for a change, it's not about propaganda, it's not about one person. It is about what he stands for. When you talk about this boy who's lost his grandmother, and she's assassinated, and they're standing by the funeral pyre. And he brings alive the person. And again, when he loses his father, and he's informed, he's away, and he's informed, and he has to come back, and this is a young boy we are talking of here. And this inheritance of the dynasty that he carries on his shoulders, is he going to be able to follow his dream of, whether it's his dream or not, but there seem to be attempts of creating a new cadre within the party, or is he going to have to make compromises along the way? So what is that route map? Somewhere I felt in Sugatha's writing, I found that. I found a route map not just for Rahul Gandhi, but also for the BJP, for everyone who's, bringing the other down. Like even talking of the idea of India and presenting to us both sides of that idea of India. Somewhere it also triggered the idea of India within oneself. What is that idea of India I hold within myself? I think that's what the book triggered for me. And I think that's very valuable. Because also you talk, in political terms, you talk of this permanent coalition. And for me, in very simple terms, it meant that we wouldn't be fighting against each other about ideology, about saying my party is better than yours, or I did more than you, or you did less than me, or we won so many seats and you won so many. I think just to be able to say that yes, this is the place where we belong, this is the country we love. Yes, we are multilingual, we have several cultural identities, and especially those of us who come from mixed backgrounds, as I myself do. We don't have the luxury of hating anybody. We can't. Because within the family, you have several religions. Within your friend circle, you have several castes, you have several religions, and to each his own. And I have to say I'm very happy that I've been able to enjoy a certain freedom that allows me to partake of other religions. And I'm not so sure, Sugatha, that my own friends have that liberty. And those are the fears. When a fear comes up, when my freedom is threatened, that's when fear comes up. And I think this book gave me something to hang on to. And for that, I consider it valuable. And therefore, I want to read something more to you from this. Also, he talks about I was talking about the uniter and the unifier, and how there is this impulse, centralizing impulse that you talk of. And he talks of the permanent coalition. It's a wonderful idea. It's a great idea. But how are we also going to make it possible? I think it's not enough for us to think of leaving things to the leaders. After all, it is we who make the country. And Sonia has made way, right? She said she will not take up prime ministership. And there's a line in your book where you say, who will be Rahul's Manmohan Singh? Yeah? And for Rahul to also declare that he's a Shiv Bhakt, and there have been some bloopers along the way during the yatra, and all of that, and yet something very sincere about the person comes across. But will sincerity be enough? Will the sympathy that this fifth generation politician of this dynasty, will that sympathy sustain us through and him on a journey that takes us beyond these confines and parameters that seem to limit us as a people? I want to read to you something that tells us about how we've been reduced to just two views. He also talks of how the BJP and the Modi government has dissolved the diversity of gods. And I think that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing you've said, because yes, doing the Bharat Jodo Yatra has been a very big step and an important one at that. But I think for Rahul to also find something that's his own, that he can own and also share, I think is a big thing that's required. So I'm going to start with this. He says, to borrow the words of Italian political philosopher Antonio Gramsci, we are only left with organic intellectuals. I mean, you refer to Lucian's liberals, and by which he means people who are used by classes or enterprises to organize interests, gain more power, and get more control. Academic and author Edward said, interpreting Gramsci's phrase in his right lectures, said that today's advertising and public relations expert who devises techniques for winning a detergent or airline company a larger share of the market would also be considered an organic intellectual by Gramsci. Someone who, in a democratic society, tries to gain the consent of potential customers, win approval, marshal consumer or voter opinion. This becomes obvious during election debates on television. One heard spokesperson after spokesperson in different garbs, talking heads of various views, but nobody who spoke for the common man and the common good. Spokespersons have taken up the space vacated by public intellectuals. Sugatha says, similarly, so in the print media. If one newspaper promotes a set of intellectuals close to a party, the rival newspaper allows intellectuals from another party to cultivate the space. The idea of balance or objectivity would be to use them alternatively or next to each other. As a result, the space that a public intellectual once occupied is no longer a non-aligned space, but is a space that is cleverly shared by political parties and interest groups. As a result of all this, where we need to have a multiplicity of views, there are only two views. And that's what I hear. And I think Sugatha has brought to the fore not just the work of a journalist. He also talks of this, the equivalence, the moral equivalence that you talk of. Yeah, the false moral equivalence, that's a bind for the journalist, for the writer. And in present times, I mean, if you also mention Dabholkar, and you mention Pansare, and you mention Vemula, and Gauri Lankesh, and what's happened. And as a performer, I can tell you that it's hard. Right now, what we're going through is hard. People might say that, oh, what are you afraid of? But when something is being taken away from you, and you don't know exactly what it is, it's not quantifiable. You can't hold it in your hands, but you hold it in your heart very strongly, with great affection, with great pride, with all those things that you call values. And then you feel this thing, you feel this hollow just taking root in you. And you know you're losing something, but you don't know what. And that, I think, Sugatha's book triggered for me. And I said that, yes, I've got to. I might not be a fan of Rahul Gandhi, but I want to know the man. And I think the book did that for me, you know. And I would say, read it. With that, I'll end my little talk and make way for the next speaker. Thank you so much for being patient listeners. Thank you.
Our next guest is one of Bangalore's most distinguished citizens and a remarkable Indian. He was born in what is today's Pakistan, grew up in Punjab and served in Karnataka. He was Government of Karnataka's Additional Chief Secretary and Development Commissioner and India's Ambassador to UNESCO. Chiranjeev Singh ಅನ್ನೋ ಹೆಸರನ್ನು ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರು ತಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಾದ ಹಾಗೆ ಅತಿ ಆತ್ಮೀಯತೆಯಿಂದ ಹಾಗೂ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಬದಲಿಸಿ ಚಿರಂಜೀವಯ್ಯ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. He indeed has a beautiful explanation. You all should listen to it. But now, before that, I request Mr. Chiranjeev Singh.
Congratulations on having written a great book. This is going to be a milestone in Indian political writing. The first sentence of the book, it starts with this. This book is not a biography. It examines and analyzes Rahul Gandhi's ideas, leadership, reason and emotion since he officially entered politics in March 2004. So it's not a biography, and it's not an analysis, the pop psychological analysis which Paradashak of Rahul Gandhi. To me, it seems this book is a meditation on the idea of a liberal, secular, pluralistic, and diverse India and the nature of power. As far as the character of Rahul Gandhi that comes out, Kaushik Basu has summed it up very nicely, which is quoted here. He says, I don't know enough to comment on Rahul Gandhi's political skills, but in terms of honesty, basic decency, trustworthiness, and inclusive values, he's a rare politician. What we really need is now decency in politics. I have worked with the late Mr. Devrajas, and I have seen how he treated his political opponents. There was decency, there was understanding that the opposition also has its role to play. And this book is as much about Rahul as it is about the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. While reading the book, it came to my mind one of my favorite authors, Barbara Tuchman, her book, Distant Mirror. This book is about a family, Angela de Coucy, in the 14th century France, and using this family and its history, Barbara Tuchman paints a picture of the entire 14th century. Here, taking the figure of Rahul Gandhi, Sugatha has painted a picture of the post-Indira Gandhi years. So in that sense, it's a very complex work. And the fact that I was reminded of A Distant Mirror just shows its literary worth also. Basically, Sugatha has a literary sensibility. So this is a very literary and literate book with many literary references in it, from Baswanda and Purandar Dasa to T.S. Eliot. And it's a very beautifully written book. Sugatha's mastery of language is enviable, because political writing can be very dull and boring. This book is a very, very literate and readable book, which is not an easy thing when you are writing about a political personality. Now, another thing which comes out here is the spiritual element and compassion. When you are reading the book, just note how many times the word compassion comes in the book. This is what I think is now lacking in our society. In 1974, there was a survey done in England, which I often refer to, and they listed qualities like courage, faithfulness, fidelity, etc., compassion. And the people were asked to give them numbers. Compassion by far came out the best quality. And this book is written with great empathy, and I think what comes out of the book is the element of compassion and spirituality. I would just read. There is a bit about esoteric spiritualism, where he says, Rahul Gandhi is not that you are saying. I am not him. If you do not understand, read the Hindu scriptures. Read about Shivaji, you will understand. Don't look puzzled. Rahul Gandhi is in your head, not mine. Rahul Gandhi is in BJP's head, not in mine. Now, spirituality is something which one is born with. Maybe in later life, through one's efforts, one can attain some element of it, but I think spirituality suffuses your personality like fragrance in a flower. And what comes out in the quotes which Sugatha has selected from Rahul, his speeches and interviews, is the spirituality. Would he be a better politician if he gives up this spirituality? One doesn't know. Sugatha, I mean, this book raises many questions, but to Sugatha's credit, he doesn't answer those questions. Nor is his job to answer those questions. I don't think these questions can be answered anyway. But there it is, I think, this spiritual idea is, when he says, we should quote from the Upanishads, which means he's trying to draw inspiration from the Upanishadic philosophy and not from the economists and political scientists. So there is this great dilemma in the personality. On the one hand, Upanishadic philosophy says, ten tyakten apujita, that is, leave that and then enjoy, that is detachment. Now, if you cultivate detachment, which he says somewhere in this book also, it's quoted, then how do you become a political leader? I think this is one of the basic problems which has been highlighted by Sugatha in the book, and which Rahul Gandhi has not been able to kind of resolve within himself. There is a section here, karmic dependence, where Sugatha quotes T.S. Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Woodcock. Now, as a spiritual person, the strange burdens of Rahul Gandhi, Sugatha calls them strange burdens. I would say he would understand them as karmic burdens. And I think he's trying to come to terms with the karmic burdens. Here it says, the two in the same karmic dependent section, the two characters on the Indian political scene are Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi. one wondered if Modi could survive without a Rahul Gandhi. Modi was made to look big by contrast. I was reminded of Jigar Muradabadi's शेर अर्श की बुलंदियां फर्श की पस्तियों से हैं, उनका गुरूर देखकर बन गए खाकसार हम. So this is how the yin and yang of Rahul Gandhi and Modi plays out. So the book is as much about Modi and BJP as it is about Rahul Gandhi. As I said, like a distant mirror, being about one family history illuminating the whole 14th century. This is not a distant mirror. This is a mirror which is in our hands. So this mirror shows us what's happening here. And here is something. Modi grew his beard at a moment of COVID-19 distress. It was a ritual, a vrat and a vow that grew from religiosity. Rahul Gandhi had allowed his beard to seek purposeless joy in its length. I'm quoting this sense because I have a long beard. It was not like the stubble of his earlier boredom. There was such abandon that it became a filter of freedom for all the breeze that passed through it. Rahul Gandhi was prone to giving in a verbose interpretation. He could speak of it in spiritual terms, but his actions had greater power than his words. So this term, spiritual terms like compassion, comes again and again in the book. And I think this is where the dilemma of Rahul comes from. I don't know what can be said about that, because it's something which is deep within you. One's spiritual angst has to be resolved within oneself. It's within oneself. But the book very eloquently talks about the culture wars, and I think this is one of the key parts of the book. The culture wars which the Congress has singularly failed to understand and take part in. Now, just a small example about how we don't know much about each other. There is a discussion about Rahul's wearing a janeo. That is Surjewala, the Congress spokesperson, says that he is a Janeodhari, Brahmin, etc., etc. Now he comes from Haryana. He is a Jat. And for Jats, Swami Dayanand converted them to Arya Samaj because he promised them that he would give them Janeo, which means the Shudras would be elevated to the level of Dvijas. And that's why even today, Haryana and Western UP, the Jat heartland, has Arya Samaj, and nowhere else you find Arya Samaji followers, because Swami Dayanand was chased off by the Sanatanis from Banaras and other places. So for somebody from Haryana to look at his Janeo Dharana as something worth commenting on is part of this culture war which generally we fail to understand. We just don't know enough about culture wars. I mean, before coming to the South, how much did I know about the South, and how much do the Southern people know about the North? And this is where Sugatha's book, while talking about culture wars, points out something which is much greater than the idea of Rahul Gandhi and his idea of India. And also the manipulation of media, about which Madam Rao also spoke at length. She quoted from that. This is, I think, one of the other major takeoffs from the book. The culture wars, the manipulation of media and the yin and yang relationship between Congress and BJP, and Rahul's spiritual, his, I suppose, spiritual struggle within himself to come to terms with loss. Dr. Saab has spoken about it. I have seen, I am a child of partition. I have seen people cope with the trauma of politician. I have met the person who killed 9 women of his family to save them from being abducted and raped and all that. And, so imagine the kind of trauma people live with. He has to resolve that dilemma. But the question whether he will be a strong political leader, I don't know. Sugatha has used the term Rajguru syndrome in the book. Maybe he would prefer to be a Rajguru. Maybe he would like to be a conscience keeper of Hindustan. And the book leaves you enough to think about. This is a great achievement of the book because it makes you think. So it's a very beautifully written book. Congratulations again, Sugatha. So I would only say that if you want to understand what is happening around us, the culture wars, the media manipulation, the kind of politics we have today, the loss of decency in politics, etc. This book would help you understand all that. At least it will make you think about these issues. So he raises issues, he raises questions, and it is not, as I said earlier, it is not his job to provide answers. Everyone has to find one's own answers because the answers are within us. The Indian tradition enjoins that you have to find God within you and all answers within you. So thank you, Sugatha, for at least making us think about the questions and trying to find answers within ourselves. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about your great book.
Good evening, everybody. Last Sunday, I went to launch Mr. S.R. Hiremat's biography. So I was a little concerned that I may just go on speaking. So therefore, I've come prepared with a small note and I will present that before you. And I'm also too overwhelmed to speak in the presence of such a distinguished panel and a distinguished audience here. I feel very honored and privileged that the 4 distinguished elders came here to launch my book today and spoke about it with such great insight and warmth. They're not just people I admire for their learning and their many professional accomplishments, but also for their integrity and humanity. I first encountered Professor Davies' name and writing in the mid-1990s through my father, G. Srinivasaraju, and Professor G.S. Shivarudrappa, who later became the Poet Laureate of Karnataka. One afternoon, they discussed Professor Davies' book, After Amnesia, with me. I think it had just then won the Sahitya Academy Prize. I was still a student then. In later years, when his work expanded from literature per se to larger issues concerning our society, and even though we had not met and spoken in person, I felt he was very close to me and very dear to me. One's father's recommendation cannot but be close and dear. Thank you, sir. Dr. Sanjeev Jain was someone my teacher, Jeremy Seabrook, instructed that I should read and listen to very carefully. I hope I have been attentive enough. Jeremy never instructs, but in this case, he had not only instructed, but has followed it up from time to time in the last 2 decades. That's how long I've known Dr. Jain. Whenever I refer to him with Nupur, his lovely partner and my journalistic colleague, as her rock star husband, she has lovingly rebutted and rubbished it. He's one of the finest minds in India that I've had privilege to know. Padmavati Rao, or Pinti, to many of us. I first met her as my wife's play director. But before that, and even before I met my wife, I had been her unabashed fan. Some of the best Kannada movie songs have been picturized on her. Generations of Kannadigas have not stopped humming them since they were first made. She's a very special talent and a presence in our cultural world. She wears multiple hats as an actor, writer, and translator, and wears them all very lightly, passionately, and deals with everything before her with a great deal of the word that Mr. Singh just mentioned, compassion. Mr. Chiranjeev Singh, to whom this book is dedicated, has been a father figure. His steadfast guidance, wisdom, and love at various difficult and happy bends in my life, especially after my father passed away in 2007, has kept me in one single piece. This book, as you all know, is dedicated to him. Sangeeta read out the lines, and I've always admired his very saintly graciousness. You heard the lines of dedication. Do I need to say anything more about him? I'm grateful and indebted to the presence of all these 4 elders. I'm also extremely happy to see that in our very polarized times, the book has received some bipartisan support today. I see friends from political and various political and ideological views present here today. Left, right, center, conservative, liberal, socialist, and communist. I see Mr. Leher Singh from the BJP, I see Ravi from Nitish Kumar's JDU, I see Mr. Roshan Beg, I see Mr. B.L. Shankar, of course, Mr. Kondachi, who's both stalwarts of the Congress Party, and Mr. Nair, who, even as he was reading the book, kept texting me about the problems that he has in the book, especially my interpretation of Gramsci and Edward Said's interpretation of Gramsci, the stalwart of the communist movement in Karnataka, Mr. Siddhan Gowda Patil of the CPI, and of course Brijesh Kalapa of the Aam Aadmi Party. So we have covered the entire political spectrum here. And I'm also greatly honored that the man who gave me my first job and who nurtured me, and if I am whatever I am today, a large part of the credit should go to Mr. Hari Kumar. He's here, and I'm greatly honored that he's here. And he just does not. Whenever I tell him that he was responsible for a lot of my professional growth, he doesn't seem to sort of, be carried away by that. He sort of looks at it with a great deal of suspicion, and that's what makes him great. And I again reiterate, without him, I wouldn't have been here today. So I assure you, because of this wide spectrum that I spoke about, so I assure you all that this book is for everybody. And the speakers here have also emphasized that it's for everybody, even for those who detest labels. It's a commentary about our present times. It is an empathetic study of an individual about whom I've had a love-hate relationship. I've met him several times. I've spent a lot of time with him, just one-to-one speaking. But I've also been extremely confused about him. But there's one thing that has always struck me about him, is that he's extraordinarily compassionate and sincere. That's something that that's been a constant whenever I've met him. So I urge you to critically engage with the book. In one of the interviews, because when this book came out, there was a lot of apprehension in the minds of a lot of congressmen as to what may be the content of this book. And they were just trying to avoid speaking about it or referring to it. So in one of the interviews that I gave a television channel in Delhi, I borrowed a line from Rahul Gandhi. And I said, "Dharo mat, is kitab ko padho." But here, don't be afraid, do read this book. So it has been the hardest to convince my friends in the Congress to read this book. And after Professor Devi and Dr. Chirjeev Singh and Dr. Sanjeev Jain and Padmavati have spoken, I'm sure they're going to loosen up and pick up this book and read. So there is some unstated fear in them, and I'm sure the capaciousness of liberalism that Rahul Gandhi prescribes has space for this book. I don't think Rahul Gandhi is an anti-intellectual project. I don't think he's an anti-intellectual project. Ever since the book has hit the stands, and even before it could hit the stands, I have been asked two questions. Why did you write this book now? Or, why did you write this book? I could smell anxiety, affection, prejudice, presumption, cynicism, and dismissal in the questions. If the ones who loved Rahul Gandhi were anxious to know if I was disturbing the prospects of Rahul Gandhi just before the 2024 general elections, the ones who had dismissal in their tone wanted to know why I was wasting my time writing about someone who was absolutely useless, quote unquote useless. He should be written off, not written about, was their argument. I'm sure a lot of you too in the audience have questions under these two broad categories, but I would only urge you to read the book before you make up your mind. This why and why now question is not new to journalists and writers. I have been queried many times on these lines in my long journalistic career. I complete nearly 30 years in journalism. Even when I wrote my previous book on the life of former Prime Minister Mr. H.D. Deve Gowda, I was asked, why on him of all people? What has he done? People could barely hide their prejudice that either emanated from their caste, class, or ideological affiliations. I learned long ago that in order to survive, one has to keep getting past the why question. I have done just that and written whatever I wanted to write and however I wanted to write. Writing is not just about being contrarian or about reveling in anarchic joy, but is also about a moral imperative and a deeply felt urge to examine the immediate present and contemporary present. At least for me, it is not about the fanciful idea of offering a historical corrective to things that may have gone wrong. Sometimes I tell myself that mine is a hack's progress. I write because I don't have anything else to do, and I have no other skill to earn a living. I don't suffer from pretensions. I know books make nothing happen. Like Auden said, poetry makes nothing happen, but merely survives in the valley of their making. After people have started engaging with the book, besides the glowing reviews, there's one wonderful review in the front line today, a long 4-page review. Glowing reviews, official and not so official reactions. 2 responses I found very interesting. One, a 84-year-old Buddhist monk bought a copy of the book in Delhi at Bahari Sons and sent it to Rahul Gandhi through his channels. I do not know what happened after that. 2, I received a mail just this morning from a reader from a corner of India, tucked away corner of India, who's reading my book. He wrote, "I'm still reading your book. I am a slow reader always, but this time I'm slower than usual. It is because while I'm reading your analysis of Rahul Gandhi, along with understanding him, the political history of the present, I'm also understanding something about myself. What exactly are these understandings about myself is something that my conscious mind is not able to grasp in total at this point of time. But at a subconscious level, there is some puzzle solving happening. I don't know how to thank you for this. I hope these understandings will help me rebuild my life again, to recover my emotional health again. Sorry for getting a bit personal and emotional. I hope I did not cross any boundaries. If I did, I seek your forgiveness." This mail was absolutely precious to me, moving and humbling, which I thought no royalty or review can ever offer. Whether there will be political transformation as a result of writing, we do not know. But these personal transformations are extremely significant. So this is what I wanted to say this evening, but I will conclude by just reading a small passage from the book just to give you a flavor of it. It's already been sufficiently quoted by Pinty and Mr. Sanjeev Jain, Dr. Devi and Mr. Singh. But then in the author's voice, I don't mind. I'm sure you don't mind spending another 5 minutes. And if there are, the organizers have told me that I should take at least 2 questions. I'm willing to take more than 2. So I'll just read a small passage. And since Mr. Singh referred to and also Pinty referred to karmic dependence, the phrase karmic dependence, I thought I'll read a small little thing from there. As an author, you feel disgusted that you have to just read 500 words because you feel that it's very incomplete to read a small little passage, a fleeting thing in the book. But then, that's all we can afford this evening. So I'll just read this small little passage, which is very literary in its flow. I'll just read it. Karmic dependence is the subcategory. The phase between the victory lap of 2009, which ended in 2014, and the Bharat Jodo Yatra at the end of 2022, Rahul Gandhi to the world appeared to be in a deep existential crisis. As T.H. Eliot's Prufrock poem said, the Congress party was like a patient etherized upon a table, and in Rahul there seemed to be relentless turmoil and unending examination. The letter of the group of 23 senior Congress leaders in August 2020, seeking change and reform in the party, somewhat magnified the poetic metaphor. And time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions. And indeed, there will be time to wonder, do I care and do I care? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. There was also another reality that became apparent during this phase. Rahul's critics started looking like his karmic dependents. To criticize him became a parasitic industry that the BJP heavily invested in. One almost got the feeling that there could be no political discourse in India without Rahul Gandhi. He was being punched, but he would not punch back. It seemed he had adopted the strategy of the British royal family: never complain, never explain. Imagine a 2-character play like Edward Albee's Zoo Story or Harold Pinter's The Dumbwaiter or the eponymous Tennessee Williams's The 2-Character Play. What if one of the dramatis personae abruptly exits the stage of the middle? How long can the sole remaining player continue to pretend that the other's exit is part of the script? Who will give cues and context to the lone character to continue, even if it must deliver soliloquies for the remaining part of the play? How long will it take for the audience to figure out that something is amiss, something is really amiss? The two characters on the Indian political scene were Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi. One wondered if Modi would survive without a Rahul Gandhi. Modi was made to look big by contrast. It is not to infer or conclude here that Rahul Gandhi was small, but he or the Congress party had not invested or deliberated enough to counter this very clever and persistent construct by the BJP. The combination of mass media and social media had fired such stealth missiles that by the time the Congress realized they had to work on seriously countering this, the Pappu image of Rahul Gandhi had been implanted in the consciousness of the people. Thank you very much. Right. So if this book has been written, it is my publisher Penguin and my publisher friend Millie who is responsible for me writing this book. She persuaded me to consider this, and she said, even if it's 100 pages, why don't you write something? And of course, she was thinking of 2024 and all that. But when I started writing the book, I thought it would be a complete disservice to political commentary as well as to Rahul Gandhi if I don't place him in a larger context. So it grew and it grew and it became a 300-page book. So I was not planning to write this, but then once I started writing, I started enjoying the writing process. And since they were breathing down my neck, you asked me how much time I took. I took two months and 23 days to finish this. So it had to be written in breakneck speed, and I did it. I mean, thanks to my wife, she sort of locked me up and she said, Billy will call you, so you better finish the book. So it's been a strange experience writing about strange burdens.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think this is Akumal Ramchandra.
Hi, Akumal.
So,
This is the famous Akumal Ramchandra. Yes.
I hope so. So, first I must congratulate you. So many people have. But I think what you have done today by getting somebody who's basically not so, there, come out and talk to you and talk to the others. And I think this is going to start something very, very good and politically too. And
I'll borrow your phrase and say, "Aapka muh mein ghee shakkar." That's a phrase that you often use.
So because I think there is a mafia here. I mean, maybe
Into the mic, please.
I'm sorry. There is a mafia here. Not just not here, wherever. They think you can get there. No, but this gentleman hasn't done that. He just came out. So I think something is going to happen, and these people better watch out.
Thank you, Akumal. Thank you for the comment. Soumya is asking a question. She's one of the finest legislators that we have seen in Bangalore. A very hard-working person.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. First of all, congratulations. I have read the book about Devagowda sir as well, and absolutely a huge fan, since I read the book.
Last week, Sugatha and Millie Aishwarya, the publisher of Penguin Random House, requested me to propose the vote of thanks. I actually began by thinking it is a strange burden, right? To actually have to talk after all these eminent people. But having experienced the evening, I think it is my karmic good luck to actually be on stage with all of these people. So thank you to each and every one of you for this wonderful evening. I am taking back so many things that you have said. You have made me think about in particular. And my thanks finally to Sugatha. Why? Right? Number one, you have shown us, you have proved through this book that objective, sober, rational journalism hasn't disappeared from this country. It's still alive. Right? This book is proof of this, proof of that. You are proof of that. And my thanks once again to all the panelists. We've grown very used to shouting matches in the name of discussion, panel discussion, debate. None of that was on view this evening. It was so sober, so rational, such a pleasant thing to hear. So thank you for doing that in the way only people like you can. Thank you everyone, all the dignitaries here. Thank you Mr. Mohan Kondaji for arranging the auditorium. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.